Welcome back. Well, still with me in studio, the head of BDO's Africa Desk, Owen Murphy, Harambee Youth Accelerators Executive Lebo Nke, and Bernd Muller from the International Labour Organization. And we're taking a look at how to best tackle Africa's pressing youth unemployment crisis. Let's pick up on where we left the conversation, and I guess Owen giving us a nice segue into policy and regulation. Bernd, if business is to adopt a more risky approach in their hiring practice, becoming more inclusive, as Lebo highlighted, in their hiring practices, surely increasing labour market flexibility becomes an imperative here, where labour laws that are rigid, for example, will make employers more hesitant to trying their luck, so to speak. Are you seeing any stride being made in that respect? Because certainly in South Africa, we seem to be moving in the opposite direction.
Well, yes and again, yes and no. First of all, I think the main takeaway needs to be what ILO is promoting, and for good reasons, is we are promoting a formalization, so a gradual transition from informal to formal. Reason being that, of course, while we know the reality of a large informal economy in Africa, across most economies, the working conditions are, of course, quite bad. By definition, it means there's no social protection for workers. It means no contract security, probably lower wages, and so on and so forth. So there's a certain argument why formalization is really important if we want to also move ahead with living conditions and poverty reduction. That said, and then I think those arguments can go by side. I also agree with Owen what he said, that there needs to be a certain flexibility in the sense that we mustn't demonize the informal economy. Because also within the informal economy there's a lot of diversity. There are better informal employers and worse informal employers, and we need to work with informality to allow them to become more productive, to offer better conditions, maybe to gradually offer more secure contracts, so that actually by that they move to the more formal economy. But that doesn't mean we don't engage with them.
Absolutely, and it's a very tricky balancing act to perform here, Owen, because you want to avoid policies that drive the informalization of the workforce. You want, a more formalized economy at the end of the day, but, you've got to take it in its stride, I guess.
Yes, no, definitely. When one does, but I think one also has to realize the reality of Africa, and that the informal sector is so pervasive that one has to say, well, you have to design policies around it. And as I said, successful informal traders often migrate to the formal sector, and then you have them then contributing to the social security grant system. And so I think it's a phased approach.
So with what's been said so far then, is unemployment amongst the skilled a different problem to tackle compared to overall unemployment, and does it need a different policy approach?
Sure. I think it does. Once again you are looking at how the government can position itself in the education sector, and then also, of course, there is a very in South Africa certainly there's a huge, you want to call it an incentive industry, and then the decision has to be made by government. Who do we want to incentivize? In South Africa, certain industries have been targeted. For example, the automotive industry gets a lot of incentives. And those become very, very tricky policy issues. So if you are providing incentives in the formal sector, which one do you choose?
And how do you measure the success of it at the end of the day?
I just want to come in on there around policies, because I think it's not just only labor, labor policies that we need to consider. If we just think about South Africa and some of the barriers to employment, transport is a big issue. And, I think just because of where the jobs are and where people live, I think on average a young person spends about 600 or close to 938 rands, a month looking for a job. 600 of that is transport. And if you think about the number of people who are just surviving on social grants, on a 380 rand social grant, and it takes 600 rands to actually go out and find a job, I think that there can be some creative work done around policies that serve work seekers and around transport.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, we need to think a lot broader. But and I just want to also go back to this issue of skill. I think, you know, another way that we can think about it is just thinking more about proxies. I think that we are so obsessed with qualifications that that is the only way that we get to recognize what a young person can do. And yet there's so many other proxies and so many other ways that we can tell someone's potential.
So we can actually envision this.
Yeah. So I mean, we work across you know, various, I'd say about like 10 industries, and when we think about who basically survives in a retail and hospitality environment. If you think about the fact that it's young people who have to work, you know, 7 days a week, you work on public holidays, you work on weekends, and for a lot of young people, that, for example, is a big shock when they come into the world of work. And understanding people who are already active in the informal economy and who are showing in some way what we call voluntary agency, someone who's somehow hustling and making a way to survive. I think that should tell you something about what that person can do. We run batteries of assessments that are able to tell us the potential of a young person and what environments that they're best suited to be operating in. And in some cases, it does require a little bit of bridging that gap. But it doesn't require a 2-year, 3-year qualification. Yeah. And I think that there are shorter and thin slices of interventions that we can think of.
Bern, talking about thinking broader, but also while there are gains to be made from addressing the skills mismatch through education and training, what about reworking something like immigration policy at the end of the day? What role do you see immigration of skilled labor playing and the opportunity that that potentially brings with it?
Yes, the thing is, of course, immigration is always a difficult topic in the sense that it brings yet more workers into an already stretched labor market, so to speak. So you need to manage that quite carefully, and policy comes in there. But it could, of course, have a let's say skills transfer effect, that if you have high-skilled workers coming in. But I'm not sure I would use it as the main example to tackle that. First of all, on the issue of formal skills and so on, what ILO is doing also, we're trying to promote quite a lot what we call recognition of prior learning. So having those who don't have formal transcripts or formal certificates try to work with the governments or the education authorities to acknowledge the type of learning they have undergone through their life. A lot of it might not be very formalized. So ILO is trying to work a lot on that. Speaking of policies, and you asked what really works and what are the differences, I think as a bottom line, that's always what I'm trying to bring across. Very often there's this mantra of growth. We need to focus on growth and so on, but I think that is not enough. We need to focus on those sectors, and that goes for every country, not South Africa, not just Tanzania, any of them, where you can identify those sectors that are particularly employment intensive. Yeah. So you need to find those and nurture those sectors that work. And in each of these countries, they will be different. And a lot of these sectors might not even very much be there. There's the example of Ethiopia, for example, where there was no flower sector in 2003. The government came with a lot of targeted incentives, and suddenly they're competing at the same level as Kenya, more or less, and hundreds of thousands of workers, 75% of which are women, have been employed in the sector. I'm not saying everything is great there. There are also some issues in terms of quality of employment, but this is a great example to see that you nurture particular sectors with very targeted incentives and identify those where you can create the jobs for the youth.
Well, let's leave it there. Thank you all for having joined me in studio this evening. Of course, that's Owen Murphy, the head of BDO's Africa Desk, Lebong Care Executive at Harambee, and Bernd Muller, who's specialist at the International Labour Organization. And with that, we've come to the end of this week's show, but you can catch Africa Inc. at the same time, same place.